Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. Tonight, it's going to be all about Syria. Syria has been witnessing an increased escalation in the past few days, with many countries foreign to Syria intervening in what's happening internally inside of Syria. And I chose my colleague Kevork Almassian, who is a native of Halab, to come and share his perspective. And I also wanted to talk in depth about the history of the conflict in Syria, beginning from 2011. And we're going to go back a little bit in history in a very brief manner, then reach the escalation, talk about it in detail, what each side wants from Syria, what led us to this moment of this escalation, and what would be the potential ways out. Kevork, welcome back to the channel, and thank you so much for joining me. You're having a lot of podcasts recently. You told me you had 4 podcasts today.
You're the 5th today.
5th, yes. So thank you for giving me the time, and our viewers, of course, just to kind of clarify as to everything that's going. Firstly, you are a native of Halab. You were born in Halab. Can you firstly describe what the situation is like now inside of Halab, Aleppo, and what are your relatives and friends are saying that's happening on the ground?
First of all, I would like to give some historical context for your respected audience, how I ended up in Aleppo. My name doesn't look like an Arabic name. However, 100 years ago, when the Armenian genocide occurred under the Ottoman Empire and the young Turkish government back then, my grandparents escaped to Aleppo. They used to be in a town called Kilis nowadays. And we arrived in Syria, and we were embraced, protected by the Syrian people, the Arab people, the Kurds in Aleppo. And we have been given shelter and all sorts of support by the people in Syria back then. And we eventually became citizens. And I was born and raised in Syria, eventually as an ethnic Armenian, but born in Syria. But the history of the Armenians goes back centuries. Even before Christianity, there was an Armenian empire back then stretched to Syria. So the great Armenian empire under Dikran the Great. So Armenian presence goes back in history centuries. This is not something new. And the Armenians participated in all sorts of aspects, let's say, in the Syrian society, and to the extent that if you go to Aleppo nowadays and you ask about the Armenian people, they would say they're very hardworking people, they don't lie, and they say lots of good things. And we share the same sentiments with the Arabs and with the Kurds, with the Syrians, with different ethnicities and religions in Aleppo. It's a society of coexistence, and everybody knows each other's, let's say, beliefs and the social norms and respect each other. So during Christmas times, we receive our Muslim neighbors, and in Muslim occasions in Easter, we go to them. So this is the, let's say, the harmony in Aleppo, and it's not like something engineered from outside. This multiculturalism was not enforced on Syria. Syria is a melting pot of different civilizations, cultures, languages, different civilizations and empires. So this was a place, Aleppo is very also important during the Silk Road, not the current one, the initiative, the old ancient Silk Road, right? Up until this moment, the old Aleppo souks are very active on this path. So Aleppo is very significant. It's very dear to my heart. I studied there. I learned Arabic there. I speak Arabic as a mother tongue. So I consider myself a Syrian, and I'm ethnic Armenian, but I am Syrian. I hold only Syrian nationality and the Syrian passport, and I feel Syrian. It's difficult to explain what it means to feel Syrian. I just feel like I'm Syrian, you know? What happened in Aleppo now is very unfortunate, in my opinion, because this city has witnessed 4 years of siege and occupation by a group called Al-Nusra Front. Al-Nusra Front has been the offshoot of Al-Qaeda linked to Ayman al-Zawahiri. And they have led this operation in 2012 alongside other what they call rebel groups funded by the CIA, for example, the group of Haji Maria. There were multiple of them. Nuruddin al-Zinki. Nuruddin al-Zinki was directly also funded by the Pentagon. And they conquered half the city. They imposed a siege on the city later. They were able to occupy half the city and siege the other half. And the government used to drop food and the other necessities by helicopters back then. And I had a family stuck there. It was a total blockade. It was very dire. Now, the Aleppo people didn't join the anti-government protests, and they were very passive about it. There are multiple reasons why they didn't join it. First of all, in my opinion, there were two reasons. First of all, they noticed a pattern of what has happened in Iraq with the regime change operation, and also then in Libya. They noticed the pattern of foreign interference, especially from Turkey. Turkey was very active at the beginning of the war, still is, in its support, let's say, to the opposition groups on the ground. And Aleppo has always been a competitor to Turkey. And Aleppo has been an economic powerhouse which used to compete the industries in the manufacturers and the products in Turkey. So Aleppians didn't want for Turkey to conquer, or the Turkish funded and backed, let's say, insurgents to occupy their city, because they didn't want for Turkey to have the upper hand over a city which is a competitor to Turkey itself. And the second reason why they didn't join this, because the Aleppians preferred stability over a promise for democracy and human rights. And why I mentioned they preferred stability, because if you have a business, if you have factories, and just for context, Aleppo had at least 4 industrial zones before the war, and they had tens of thousands of workers, professionals and engineers, and just professionals working there, which means hundreds of thousands of families used to eat and drink thanks to these industrial zones in Aleppo. And the average salaries back then were around $1,000 to $2,000 in these industrial zones. So we're speaking about a really good sum of money, right? So if one person works, he can feed a family of 4. So Aleppo's situation was very good in terms of the economy, the factories, businesses, etc. So the people preferred stability instead of chaos, because they see what's happening in the other regions. Now, between this 2012 and 2016, Mahmoud, there are videos on the internet. You can check it yourself on X or on YouTube. Just type, guys, on anywhere, Aleppo factories Turkey, and you will see videos of these Turkish-backed and the American-backed insurgent groups, which they call them the rebel groups, used to dismantle these factories, put them on tracks, and send them to Turkey, completely dismantle them. So I was in 2014 in Aleppo, in August 2014, to document this organized theft of the Aleppo industrial zones. And I was in Khan Sheikhun industrial zone. There was not a single standing factory there. Every single factory, we're talking about high-tech factories, were dismantled, put on tracks, and sent to Turkey. And all these factories are now operating in southern Turkey. The owners of these factories used to receive phone calls from the people who looted their factories, basically telling them, your factory is in Turkey. If you want them, you have to pay this much of money, and then we return your factory again. So the people had grievances now against these so-called rebels because of them looting these factories and businesses, and Aleppo people are mostly working in businesses and in industry. So this has created a sentiment against them. So the people had this resilience, let's say, to defeat the insurgency, and the government has bet over it. And this has led for 4 years of different types of military operations and intelligence work. And finally, with the assistance of the Russian Air Force, the Hezbollah forces, and Iranian advisors, for example, Qasem Soleimani was in Aleppo back then in 2016, they managed to capture the city of Aleppo, The northern suburbs stayed in the hands of the Turkish-backed insurgents, and then they sent the militants who want to surrender to Idlib. And these militants who went to Idlib, some of them ended up here, unfortunately, in Germany, which I know them as refugees. But the vast majority stayed because Turkey organized different types of groups, military groups in Idlib. And they have trained them, gave them the gear, the weapon, the equipment, and waited for the right moment now to attack again on Aleppo, which fell very fast in the hands of these militants. Again, but this time they were backed by multinational jihadists. And I don't want to call them jihadists again, I want to call them takfiris, because jihad is very important for people to understand. Jihad means a struggle. And when somebody struggles, they struggles for a good cause and for a just cause. Now, in their mind, they are fighting against what they call an infidel Assad regime. So they want to remove Assad from power because he's infidel. They want to establish an Islamic state, this and that. And now the city is occupied, and you can see multinational takfiris in the streets from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Chechnya, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and they are just wandering the streets, and they're imposing their, even, it's not even Taliban, like it's even beyond that, it's an Al-Qaeda-like rule now on the Aleppo people. And because I gave you all this context, how Aleppo is rich and known with coexistence and different cultures and civilizations and religions, now it has become one colored rule, which is the Al-Nusra Front rule over Aleppo.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that there was an Armenian kingdom that was present at the time in Aleppo. Aleppo also had the Hellenistics, the Seleucids, and following that, the Arab caliphates, the Muslim caliphates as well, leading to the Ottoman, of course, rule for over 400 years approximately. Then we, of course, had the French mandate after the Sykes-Picot Agreement between the British and the French. And then we started to have these independence movements and inner battles inside of Syria, which basically was ruled by the Assad family after an initial military coup. Now, after the President Hafez al-Assad died, his son Bashar al-Assad came to power in the year 2000. He came with promises to have some reforms in Syria. They were quite slow. And then, of course, we've had these movements in 2012 following the rise of the Arab Spring. When it comes to the initial phases of the Arab Spring, do you think people had justified reasons to protest against the government and call for changes and reform?
Just to go a little bit before Hafez al-Assad coup, when Syria gained its independence, Syria didn't have a national army, so they were under French occupation. So they wanted to form a new army. And nobody wanted to join an army and fight. It was an agricultural country, and there was some bourgeoisie class, and people were not really had an appetite for going into an army. So during the formation of the national army, the army was like a socialist army, basically. So they presented, let's say, incentives for the people to join. So if you join the army, you get free education for your children, you get free health care. And there was, for example, there was some coupons for the fuel that you can buy fuel with the cheaper prices, rice, food, etc. So when you give incentives for people to join the army, the middle class and the below middle class will go and join the army because they're the ones who need these basic necessities the most, not the bourgeoisie. And back then, the richest families in Syria and the bourgeoisie were the Sunnis in the country. And they were the ones who went into politics, like the Atasi family, and there were many also Kurdish and Sunni Muslim families. They went to politics, prime ministers and finance ministers and different positions in the country, the parliament, etc. But some of the minorities back then, especially the Alawites, the Druze and the Christians, they were more from the middle class and below middle class sectors of the society. So they were the people who were most motivated to join the army for the incentives that the army has given to them. So now that we see in the military, because people say after Assad came to power, Hafez al-Assad, he prioritized the Alawites and the Christians in the Syrian military over other sects. But this doesn't start with Hafez al-Assad. This goes back to the late 40s when more minorities joined the military than the upper middle class people or the bourgeoisie people. And unfortunately speaking, those are historical facts. Back then in the 40s and the 50s, they used to call the Syrian army the military of the sandals, which means the people who wear sandals don't have shoes because they can't afford shoes. And up until this moment, they use this terminology to describe the Syrian army. They say Jaysh Shahatat. This is how they describe it, right? But that is a degrading insult because they see the people who serve in the military are the poor people, not the rich people, because the rich don't go to the military. So this is important context for the people to understand why there are more minority people in higher positions in the military, and then how the coup happened. Because when you go to the military and you have the Jacobian force, which is the military, you can lead a coup and get to power. And this is what happened under Hafez al-Assad, because there was a rift in the Al-Ba'ath party, which was a socialist pan-Arabist party, between him and another wing in Ba'ath party. Some of them wanted to turn Syria into a Soviet country, and Hafez al-Assad rejected that. He didn't want to become a communist party, and he led a coup, and he became the president of Syria. Hafez al-Assad ruled Syria with iron fist for around 30 years. He was, nobody can dispute that Syria was an authoritarian government. And this was an era, however, also Syria witnessed the construction of its modern statehood, like the industries in Syria. The economy has become immensely strong under Hafez al-Assad, the agriculture, and the most important thing that Hafez al-Assad did, he diversified the development in different governorates. For example, some of the factories that he was able to give license to be built in Aleppo, but he saw that in Aleppo there is already some of these factories, and he said, no, now this factory has to be established in Raqqa. So he tried to create an even, equal economy in the country. Still, the political rights and the free speech and all these rights that nowadays we take it for granted, those things didn't exist in Syria. And if you criticize, let's say, government official, this and that, nothing happens to you. But if you come to the presidency and you pose a threat to the what they call regime, then yes, you would be persecuted. Now, when Bashar came to power, he came right away from London. He's an ophthalmologist. I think, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct. And he lived in London. He married a Syrian woman who was born and raised in London, and he was a very liberal guy. You know, he came from there and he just wants to open up the country to the world. So he introduced the internet. He established private universities. He opened the economy into free market economy and invited foreign investment. Now, what happened during this era, and I'm not giving any justification to Bashar al-Assad this time, but there were sequences of events which occurred in the region, which now the government says those were the reasons we couldn't accelerate the political reforms. For example, the invasion of Iraq, right? The invasion of Iraq happened, and then the Americans said to Assad, you're going to be next. So Syria closed country on itself, because remember, Secretary of State Rumsfeld came to Damascus and said, you're next, like you have to follow our dictates or you're next. So this was 2003. In 2005, the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri happened, which Syria was accused of killing him falsely. Up until this moment, there is no evidence or any court decision against Syria. So this led into a big color revolution in Lebanon, and the Syrian army was forced to leave Lebanon. So this was another huge event in the history, in the modern history of Syria. In 2006, the invasion of Lebanon, which Syria participated in it indirectly and opened its warehouses to Hezbollah to repel the Israeli attacks. So they saw it as another event. So those were the events, 3 events, which nowadays the government claims that delayed the reforms. However, in my opinion, there were no excuses for the government to not at least tolerate more free speech in the country, especially on a lower level. Like nowadays in Syria, I think there is more tolerance from Assad's side. Like if you are criticizing Assad, nobody touches you. But then you have, unfortunately, warlords who were spawned after the war, or some MPs or some ministers. If you criticize them, you could end up in jail. So this is something very horrible. Now, when Assad came to power, Bashar, he had many political prisoners. So he freed most of the political prisoners from jail. But he kept the Islamist political prisoners. So he let the left-wing political prisoners free and the communist political prisoners free. But he kept the Islamist political prisoners in jail, in Saydnaya jail. And this was in 2011 when the protests started. The opposition sent a list of names to the Assad government that these names, they have to be freed. He freed them too, these Islamists. And some of them became the leaders in Al-Nusra Front, in Islam's army and other Ahrar al-Sham. Most of the people who left the prisons, they became leaders of militant groups. But Assad, he arrested them after 9/11. And after 9/11, Syria cooperated with the United States against Al-Qaeda in the region, and they have captured many people who were sympathetic with Al-Qaeda, or they were trying to go to Iraq and join Al-Qaeda, for example, or return from Iraq after joining Al-Qaeda. Those were detained. Now, I'm not going to come and say now I'm 100% Democrat and I'm a person who's like completely for letting all political prisoners out, but these people were dangerous people who joined Al-Qaeda or they were affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and it was better for many Syrians for these people to stay in jail, and now they are carrying out attacks against the Syrian people by joining these terrorist attacks. So yes, the Syrian people in 2011, they wanted more freedom. They wanted for free speech. We wanted political liberalization. And myself, I was caught in this hype. In the first few months, I was supporting an opposition figure called Haitham Manna. And I received so much criticism, and people told me, you shouldn't go to Syria now. You're supporting some opposition figure who is exiled in Paris. And by doing so, the Assad regime will arrest you, this and that. But I was invited by the government, basically, to a conference of reconciliation dialogue between the opposition and the government officials in early days of the crisis in August 2011. So till then, I was active as either in the middle guy or more, let's say, sympathetic to what is called the political opposition, peaceful or political opposition. But things for me started to change later. Things started to change because I started to, in 2011, remember, we didn't have this high quality video cameras. So everything was posted on YouTube. It was like 240p quality.
240px, yeah.
you need like a zoom in to see what's happening. So it's like
wavy videos and
yeah, it's so chaotic, and you see lots of clashes happening. But I started documenting and downloading these videos in my archives and watch them, listen, and try to understand what the people organizing these protests against Assad want and what type of activities are they carrying on. So I realized, I'm saying this like in the first 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months, basically, I was still either undecided or supporting the Haitham Manna. But the crimes that I've seen from the beginning, and I documented them all from March, I'm talking about March 2011, and I have a huge archives of these crimes. They're so horrendous and mostly based on sectarian hatred. And this is something for me was a red line that Syria is known for coexistence and sectarian violence, like stopping someone in the highway and asking him for his religion or sect and killing him because he belongs to some religion or sect, that is something that shouldn't be tolerable in any society. And we started seeing protesters, for example, calling for Syria. They want a president like King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. People calling for the Alawites to be exterminated and for the Christians to go to Beirut. People saying that Hezbollah has to be crushed. Like Hezbollah had no presence in Syria in 2011. And then we watched videos after videos, Mahmoud. People were slaughtered and being thrown from the rooftop of buildings. People were slaughtered and being thrown in the river of Hama. People were decapitated in the most heinous way before everybody learned about ISIS. And this was all
now, the argument that comes with, sorry to cut you off, and you can continue from that point onwards, but the argument that comes from the opposing side is it's the government crackdown initially of some of the peaceful protests that led to some people to use arms against the country.
Actually, the first day of the protests, this was on the 15th of April, basically in Daraa, the Syrian government lost 7 security personnel and they were all slaughtered. And the government thought in its very stupid and backward propaganda machine that they have, that it's not a good idea to tell the people what happened, because then the people will think that the government is weak. So we don't show them these crimes. No, the crimes were from the beginning, and the Syrian police back then, they didn't have anything but sticks in their hands. And I have videos, the Syrian police running for their lives while they are getting shot by snipers. And this could be also, by the way, a third party. It doesn't necessarily mean that those were from the protesters, because remember in 2014 when the coup happened in Ukraine, there were third parties shooting on both sides, on the protesters and on the police, to ignite a civil war or a color revolution in
similar
Kiev.
things happened in Egypt as well.
Yes. So I don't rule out that this violence probably happened by a third party, probably not from the protesters. We don't have a concrete evidence for it, but we have an evidence for big casualties among the Syrian security, including 120 security personnel who were stuck in a unit in Jisr al-Shughur in Idlib. This was again in 2011. And this was the first time we saw on video how they were slaughtering Syrian soldiers and Syrian army personnel. And in Syria, to be honest with you, there is a lot of disagreement on politics, but at least the people agreed on the army, because the army consists of all Syrian men. Like every single man who is not single goes and serves in the military, which means every family has someone in the military. And if there is anything that unites the Syrians, is the Syrian military. So when you see a Syrian soldier with a uniform being slaughtered in Syria, this also impacts everyone. It's not only about this person. So this was
can I hold you for 1 second? Leaders, certain figures in the army, they constantly declare loyalty for Bashar al-Assad. Isn't that something concerning, that they declare the allegiance only to Bashar al-Assad rather than Syria, including certain figures in the army that give the opposing side more justification to say that, well, look, it is indeed an army that belongs to Assad, whether they come from other parts of the country or not, they declare allegiance to Assad, and this is Assad's army and.
I mean, Syrian army has hundreds of thousands of soldiers. I mean, this is something that is important to address. I think that the Syrian army alleging or the allegiance only for one person, it's wrong, of course. But they're not fighting for one person. Like nobody fights 14 years for a person. And when they say بالروح بالدم نفتكي سوريا, this is also the continuation of the chant. We can focus on بالروح بالدم نفتكي يا Bashar, which means with our soul and with our blood we sacrifice for you for Bashar. But we could also say the continuation of this song, it's also we sacrifice for you, O Syria. So these people who were carrying out fight all for 14 years on the front lines, nobody wants to die for Bashar al-Assad. Nobody would like to die for the blue collar-eyed Bashar al-Assad or his cute face. Is the people who are under attack by militant groups. They're fighting first for themselves, for their souls, for their lives, and then their towns and their families. Because what happened basically later, the Syrian military, because they had to overstretch in different areas, they started sending, for example, if you're from Aleppo, you go to Aleppo, because you belong to your society, to your people. And somebody is fighting in Aleppo and you have an attack by, let's say, hundreds of militants, you're not going to sacrifice yourself for Bashar. You're going to fight for yourself and you're going to fight for your country to begin with. And the problem with this is the government propaganda machine is very backward, and they can't really communicate with the people, and they can't really construct a narrative to the people that the army is basically fighting for the sovereignty, for the integrity of the Syrian territories. They only learned this at a later stage of the military. So one of the main reasons why Syria is misunderstood is because the messaging of the Syrian government is, I can do better messaging from the bathroom while I'm watching some reels than the entire Syrian Ministry of Information. And with complete humbleness, I'm not really exaggerating. So the Syrian government is not a saint. They have many, many corrupt people in the government. But we see this conflict in Syria as an existential threat against foreign intervention. We don't see it as an organic insurgency formulated after a crackdown against the people. Because the organic insurgency, the people, if they desert from the military in mass and with big numbers and take over the Syrian military, for example, equipment, they can lead a coup against the army. You don't need over $200 billion worth of weapons from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, USA, and Turkey and other countries in order to lead an insurgency against the government. And once a foreign government intervenes in this and supplies weapons, then this becomes foreign a sponsored insurgency, and I'm not like saying it's not an insurgency, but it is foreign sponsored. And for me, I have one criteria in this to judge. I see on whose side is the US and Israel, and I am 99% certainty if I stand on the other side, I'm on the right side. Always. I have never missed, let's say, this compass.
Well, I mean, look, going back to 2011, I agree there have been reasons for people to protest. There have been disturbing images coming out from Syria, whether things being reported to be conducted by the government or the opposing side too, saying that there was an immense propaganda campaign that I started to notice more and more as time went by, that also started to raise questions as to how genuine the situation is, especially when it comes to the armed groups. The question is, so you mentioned that there might have been a third party shooting, right, to start off, right, the civil war. When was the time, based on your experience or knowledge, that we started to have the foreign intervention in arms inside of Syria? When did that happen exactly?
This is exactly, by the way, my graduation dissertation of my master thesis. You're asking me the chronology of the Syrian war, and this is a very important question for the people. The first, I will tell you what happened, basically. In August 2011, Davut Oglu, the former foreign minister of Turkey, he visited Syria. So there were protests in the country, some shooting here and there, but there was no organized insurgency against the government yet. So Davut Oglu came with list of demands, and this is revealed by the Association France Press, by the way. You can check it yourself. And Davut Oglu came with a list of demands that he's asking Assad basically to give half the government to the Muslim Brotherhood and half the parliament to the Muslim Brotherhood. And Assad said, no, like the Muslim Brotherhood is an outlawed organization in Syria, and it's considered a terrorist organization, and we're not going to
because of the feud that they had in the 70s. For some of the audience who don't know, when they tried to have a military coup,
they declared an Islamic Emirate in Hama and in Aleppo in the 80s. In 82.
And at the time, And at the time, and correct me if I'm wrong, they asked, I think there was a meeting between either Hafez al-Assad or a representative of his with them, and they asked him to pledge allegiance, if I'm not mistaken, which was then refused and then later led to the clashes between them, and that broke the relationship, or led the government to have a crackdown. Wasn't that the case?
If you see the chronology, basically in 78, between 73 and 78, the United States tried to convince Assad to sign on a similar Camp David Accord agreement with Israel, just like Egypt, and Syria rejected. And in 78, Egypt signed on this Camp David Accord. And in 79, the Muslim Brotherhood insurgency started in Syria. So if you see it, I don't see that as a coincidence, because these so-called Islamist groups always been instrumentalized by the US in order to destabilize different countries. Before them, the Brits. This was a very major and important thing. And for the people, more to context, the first time this type of Islamist groups spawned in the region was the Muslim Brotherhood in the mid-20s in Egypt. Because back then, when the Brits used to occupy Egypt, they received resistance from the left wings and the nationalists. And in order to create a rift in the society and push them to fight each other, they created and funded and sponsored the spawn of the Muslim Brotherhood. And then the Muslim Brotherhood, it has a completely different understanding of the governance. They want an Islamist nature, and they don't believe in this modern, let's say, political systems. And they started fighting with the leftists and the nationalists in Egypt. And that's how the Brits divided and conquered Egypt. And the Americans did the same in Syria in the late 70s with the Muslim Brotherhood. So in 2011, Turkey's demand was rejected. And once Davutoglu went back to Ankara in August, this was the meeting. In late August, it was already declared the formation of the Free Syrian Army, and also what is called the Syrian National Council. This was the political arm, and that was the military arm. And both. So
you're saying that there was a Turkish demand,
Turkish and Qatari.
Turkish and Qatari demand, and we give you basically an ultimatum. And if that's not followed, then we have
They didn't say that to Assad. They just asked him.
Of course
for
they didn't, but they will go ahead with arming some of these groups that would later on start to expand inside of Syria through the Turkish borders, because everyone knows that the Turkish borders were open to channel and get weapons in. Okay, so we had certain phases between the opposition, and another thing that's quite problematic and made things complicated in the situation when it comes to Syria is the fact that from day one we did not have a united opposition. Every single day they would change who's leading them, one group going out, other groups saying no, they don't represent us, we want another solution, right? But there was a reconciliation process. The first answer that the Syrian government had was the reform in 2012, right? Where for the first time they started implementing or declaring a change of constitution, which hasn't happened for decades, that said that Syria is actually a democratic republic, a couple of reforms. Some people criticized it. However, it was a step. And then we started to have certain reconciliation meetings in foreign country with intervention from multiple parties. And we had certain successes in some of them. Now, mind you, with some of these reconciliation meetings, some groups still were outside of that scope up until we reached 2019 and 2020 with the Astana. There were others in Sochi, but the Astana agreement seemed to be something that paved the way towards an understanding between the opposition and the Syrian government. And there were talks about certain participation, merging, certain reforms taking place, and the countries had an understanding, especially the countries with the most influence inside of Syria. And we're primarily talking about Russia, Iran, and Turkey, right?
Yes.
We've had 4 years of that. 4 years following which, just a few months back, there were certain reports that we're headed towards actually more de-escalation, more cooperation, more reconciliation. And even the Turkish president himself, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, said he's open to a meeting with Bashar al-Assad, with whom he had a good relationship before 2011.
Yes.
Why did Turkey decide now? Why did Turkey decide now to drift away from all of these agreements that had that was leading, at least, because it wasn't perfect in Syria. No one can deny it wasn't perfect. No one can deny that there were no crimes committed by both sides. The Syrian president himself, he admitted that they commit things that are wrong because that's war. And not many people admit that, to be fair. But they said that, and there was a reconciliation process. We were headed towards de-escalation. Why did Turkey decide to now push for this move, which is undeniably pushed by Turkey? Because we saw the governor of one of the Turkish provinces in Aleppo.
Yes.
It's as if they want to expand previous territory. So why now? Why now? What are they doing exactly? What's the end game?
You are pushing my Armenian nationalism now. Like, I'm going to speak like an Armenian now, you know? Don't push my nerves, my friend. Don't click. I just want a little bit time to explain a few things just before answering your question. You mentioned that the Syrian opposition was divided. In my research that I did about the Syrian uprising, I checked whether what happened in Syria was a democratic revolution or not. And you will come to the conclusion at the end that it was a regressive uprising. It was because there are different types of uprisings. But about the division, it's when you want to start a revolution in any country, at least you need to have a unified national will. And it doesn't have to be 90% of the people. It has to be a considerable number of people who agree on regime change in the country. And this didn't exist in Syria. In 2011, Assad was very popular. And he came out as after the 2006 war as a victorious. He presented himself as a nationalist pan-Arabist leader in the region, supporting the resistance, and that he is challenging American hegemony. So he sold his image as an anti-imperialist leader, and many people believed, and rightfully so. He was at so many occasions against American hegemony in the region when it was against the Syrian interests, and especially also against the Israeli interests. Now, the second thing, so we didn't have a unified national will, and we didn't have a leader for the revolution. Who is the leader of this revolution?
Well, that's the thing. It started off with, Ghalioun was the leader, and then the Julani, and then it changed, and Riyad al-Assad came and had the position. Okay. And then all sorts of heads.
Yeah, so we don't have a unified national will. We don't have a leader for this, and we don't have also. Look, any revolution can go violent, and so even if it went violent, it doesn't mean it's not a revolution. And this is the same thing in Syria. But when you want to wage a violent act against the government in order to remove it, you need to have a unified Jacobian force, which means the decision for violence it has to have a hierarchical constitution. Somebody is taking a decision and guiding. It's when there is no organized violence and everybody is doing whatever he wants, then it's a gang game. It's not an armed insurgency, because the armed insurgency needs for a leader giving a decision, a commander following the order, and it's not like a salat, as everybody carries an arm and goes and creates his own brigade in his neighborhood. That doesn't. It's not how uprisings happen, and I think also it needs an ideology or an intellectual ground on which the revolution stands. So I'm a young man. I was 21 years old. I want to know where this uprising will lead. And if it succeeds, what type of governance it will bring to Syria. So nobody answers you that question. So if all these factors are absent, I can't call it a revolution in Syria. You can call it as you want. People can call it as you want, but I'm talking academically in my field. This is not a revolution. So now let's go to, we were talking about the reforms in 2011.
2012, there was a new constitution, democratic at least by name. Okay, and of course we know that many countries call themselves democratic by name, but they don't implement it. But there was a certain step, a certain openness from the Assad government, and as a matter of fact, even his allies supported democratic reforms. I mean, Hezbollah at the time said, no, we actually need reforms in Syria, but we are against foreign intervention in Syria. And then we had, of course, these reconciliation meetings abroad with the countries involved. That led us to Astana, and I'm saying Astana because it was the most successful one that everything was built upon up until 2024, literally over a week ago. And of course, then what? Turkey decides to start this push, because no one can convince me that it wasn't a Turkish-made decision backed by other interests. It's not solely Turkey we're talking about, but Turkey is one of the main countries, if not the main country, responsible for this because of their geographical position with the provinces that were under control of the Syrian armed opposition groups, and because they get the training from them, because they get the fighters from them, because they get the money from them, and everything that they need from them, if not the orders, of course. And if you give the money, you have leverage to order and enforce an attack or retreat as well, or lack of action if that doesn't suit you. Because the interference of Turkey in Syria is, in their argument, to protect Turkey, or to protect Turkey from the Kurdish insurgents, whereas the Kurdish insurgents is in the east, and they are supporting those in the west to advance south, not to go east.
My friend, you already described a proxy army. What is a proxy army? This is a proxy army. You perfectly described it. Before 2011, has Syria posed any security threat against Turkey? Has anyone came a militant Kurdish or not against Turkey? Not.
No, they were in really good relations. As a matter of fact, Turkey tried to mediate and reach a peace process between the Assad government and Israel. And Erdogan was back and forth in Syria, and they had really good trade. So there were no problems.
Assad used to go on vacation. His family vacation was in Turkey. And there is a photo of him in the Mediterranean, and Erdogan is swimming with him. That's how far they went in this relationship before Erdogan backstabbed him again. Anyways, I think in this case, Erdogan saw a window of opportunity. What's happening now, he wanted to meet Assad multiple times, and he initiated this meeting with Assad, right? And Assad doesn't mind meeting with Erdogan. And he mentioned that many, many times. Assad said only he expects from Erdogan, because the mediators are Iraq and Russia, he expects Erdogan to send a formal commitment to the mediators that at the end of the day, after all these political processes, Turkish army will withdraw from Syria. And then Syrian government...
Have a physical presence in Syria, or is it just
of course. No. They have a strong presence in Idlib. They have observation points. They have armored vehicles. They have their intelligence. They're now all in Aleppo. Like the Turkish intelligence is in Aleppo, and you mentioned the valley of some of the southern Turkish governorates. They're all in Aleppo now. So what Turkey has done is he wanted to meet Assad and reconcile, but he didn't want to commit to withdraw from Syria. He wanted to have a sphere of influence. He wanted to create a belt in the north, undeclared belt, where he can send 3 million Syrians from Turkey back to Syria. But Syria said, sending all these millions of refugees back, we need a financial assistance also from the other countries. And Russia is not going to pay for that. They don't have the money, and Iran is not going to pay for that. So Turkey, if Turkey is a NATO country and can convince the Europeans or the Americans to invest in reconstruction and lifting the sanctions, then we could receive the refugees back to Syria, but not in these circumstances when our economy is strangled, we don't have access to our fuel, Americans occupy them, and we still have all this instability in the country represented by this strong militant presence in Idlib, which Pentagon says that it's the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists since 9/11. So those are the descriptions of these militants under the even the American confession. In any ways, Erdogan, when last time he would try to meet Assad in Riyadh, in this special Arab and Islamic meeting which happened for Gaza, he tried to meet Assad and Assad rejected. He didn't want to meet him even in secret. He said, first, formal commitment to withdraw from Syria, and then we meet. So Erdogan, it seems he decided to change the realities in Syria. He unleashed this proxy army on Aleppo because he saw...
Was it because of the offense? Was that it, do you think?
No, because he realized that Assad will not agree on certain deals with him, because Assad will not agree on normalizing relations. Assad rejected normalizing relations with him unless Erdogan commits to withdraw from Syria, but Erdogan wanted to keep his influence in northern Syria, something that Assad rejected. Assad said, if you commit, we can also fight terrorism together. What is your definition of terrorism? Turkey says the Kurdish militias. And we say it's these Islamist militants in Idlib. Okay, we can fight together against these Islamist militants, and the Kurds, we push them 30 kilometers away from the borders. This could be the middle ground between us. So the Kurds won't have any military presence on the border with Turkey. I think that would be fair for the Turks, right? So this was the disagreements between them. And because the time has passed, and now we have Trump coming to power in a few weeks, and J.D. Vance and RFK both said that, mentioned Syria as an example, how the deep state foiled Trump's attempt to withdraw the forces from Syria, and the signals coming from Washington that Trump has had enough of Syria, and why are we stationed in Syria? What's the strategic objective? What's the end goal, etc., etc.? He wants to withdraw forces. But if he withdraws forces, the Kurdish militias will take over all the territories. So Erdogan took this opportunity to expand in Syria through his proxy army by Al-Nusra Front and the Islamic Turkestan Army, basically, in order to have a better negotiation position when the time comes for a compromise with Trump. So he is solidifying his position in front of Trump before he comes to power, and presenting himself as a strong power which can replace and fill the vacuum when the US withdraws from Syria. So he is basically giving his credentials to Trump before Trump comes to power. So he saw this as an opportunity. But there is the Israeli factor here. This is not only an attack by Turkish proxies. This is a coordinated attack by the Turkish intelligence and the Israeli intelligence. Both saw a window of opportunity in Syria after the ceasefire in Lebanon. Ceasefire has been reached. Netanyahu posts a video statement about the ceasefire at night and says it's a 6-minute or 7-minute video, and then in one of the segments he says
warning to Assad.
Yes, he warned Assad and he said you're playing with fire, basically. Why he said that? So even before the ceasefire agreement achieved, the Jordanian foreign minister was in Damascus, and he delivered an American-Israeli message to Syria that when or if a ceasefire agreement is achieved in Lebanon, we expect from you to participate in the ceasefire agreement. And what is the participation? We are not part of this war. No, but our interpretation for the ceasefire agreement is that Syria has to siege Hezbollah, and Syria has to cut the supply chains of Hezbollah, whether through Iran or through Syria. And Assad said, no, we're not going to participate in this ceasefire agreement if the interpretation of it is to strangle Hezbollah, degrade it, weaken it, and then eventually destroy it, because this is the end goal of Israel and the United States in Lebanon. So that's only 6 hours after the ceasefire agreement. These proxy armies of Turkey, they unleashed this terrorist attack against Aleppo, and they occupied Aleppo, and they have advanced to Hama. And I want to show to the audience, I have a map of control in front of me, just for the people to understand correctly what I'm saying here. So I will screen this map. This is the map of control now on Syria, right? I think you have to bring it on the screen now.
Yeah.
So can we make it a little bit bigger so we can go the windows down? So So this is the map of control over Syria, guys. This green part now, this is the part which they occupied recently, this all. But when they were advancing from here, Aleppo, this is the M5 highway. And this M5 highway, they have been advancing to Hama, right? They wanted to take over Hama. So the Syrian army decided that this is the red line. Now we have to defend here with all our strength and force. And this is where they are seriously fighting now. But the plan was, if you see the pattern, they were going to advance from Hama to Homs. And
to Damascus.
They wanted to cut this. They wanted to come here and cut this area so that the coastal area of Syria would be separated from the rest of Syria. So this area would be turned into an island, right? And by closing the borders with Lebanon, they're trying to create a militant belt here around Lebanon. By advancing into Damascus, they wanted to create a siege next to Lebanon in order to physically create a siege on Lebanon and cut the supply chains of Hezbollah from Syria. So I would argue strongly that this was a joint intelligence operation by Turkey and by Israel in order to enforce this project of sieging Lebanon, because the Americans cannot impose this only from the Lebanese side, and the Brits already have observation points on the Lebanese side, and whatever they do, and they tried everything, they were incapable of stopping the flow of weapons from Syria. So they wanted to have a physical military force in Syria imposing this siege on Lebanon in order to degrade Hezbollah and weaken it and end it politically also from the political life in Lebanon.
And we had confirmations. I mean, there were reports that the United States, joined by the UAE, who later actually condemned the militant attack on the government forces, gave an offer to the Syrian government, just simply cut your tie with Iran and Hezbollah, and we're going to lift sanctions. We're going to accept you on the international scene, and everything will be fine. And then Syria rejected again. And it's not the first time that they rejected. So clearly there's some sort of participation there. And what's more suspicious, in my opinion, about the intervention from the Turkish side is the fact that if they are indeed worried about the U.S. withdrawal from certain bases, well, where are the bases? They're in the southeast. And then you have the Kurdish movements who will potentially take over towards the eastern part. The fact that they are going down the M5, and I spoke about this a couple of times in my previous videos in the past couple of days, proves that the intention is to create that deadlock in Ladiqiyah, and then move on south, potentially to the borders of Jordan, and controlling all of the M5 and stopping everything to Hezbollah. And who would that serve? Who would that serve? Apart from Israel, who just suffered a massive blow, a very fragile blow when it comes to Hezbollah, and is still facing a fierce resistance from the Palestinian resistance.
Yes.
We're here now, though. We're here now. The Iranians are trying to mediate. The Russians are trying to tell the Turkish side that, listen, well, you're breaching the Astana agreements. You're breaching the Sochi agreements. The Turkish side started to change a little bit of tone after they met with Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran. However, the forces are still advancing. And there are reports of forces being deployed from some of the Iraqi movements in support of the Syrian government. Israel today killed, or reports say that Israel killed, assassinated, they haven't confirmed yet Hezbollah, but the leading figure of Hezbollah in charge of liaison with the Syrian army. That means we have a direct participation from Israel in this battle simultaneously with the Turkish participation from the north. The people, the movements, the armed groups fighting the government, they are not showing any sign that they will be retreating. What we're seeing is advancement. They are charging everyone that we are on a massive campaign now, all of a sudden, just one day after the ceasefire, after 4 years of quiet and potential talks to de-escalate and reach a resolution. Now we decided to liberate all of Syria, according to them. And it doesn't seem to be, or we're not yet seeing any signs of pressure being applied from the Turkish side. That is the main player in this game. Of course, in the back, we have the US, we have NATO, we have Israel to actively participating. Is it going to increase, in your opinion? Are we going to see a bigger clash? What's the solution? What's the way out?
I think the Iranian and the Russian side are playing with the rules that the enemy have set, and these rules only serve the US and NATO countries. And they are still pretending that there is some rules-based international order and that the other side respect the rules and the agreements. I think that we've been played a lot in Syria with these so-called rules and agreements with different parties. And it's a shame for this to happen because Russia trusted Turkey to implement the Astana Accords and disarm these jihadists from Idlib. And I think with this, it's a huge blow for Russia and a huge blow for Iran. And of course, huge blow for the Syrian people at the end. I think, brutally honest with you, my friend, the situation is very difficult in Syria at the current moment. It's very, very dire. If Syria to withstand and resist this militant attack on Hama, they are capable of doing it. But in order to advance again to Aleppo and liberate Aleppo again, or Idlib, they will need the assistance of direct assistance of Iran, of Iraq, and other parties in the region directly and massively. So is there an appetite for that? Nobody knows. But if this, for example, Iran or Russia do not come for support of Syria, they will lose all their also investments. And I'm not talking about material investment. They have strategic interests in Syria, geopolitical interests. In terms of the Iran has the axis of resistance, it will completely crumble. If without Syria there is no axis of resistance, it will crumble. And there will be siege imposed on Lebanon, and they will push Lebanon into civil war. And it will be the end for Hezbollah. They will be engaged in an internal conflict. And they will also cause, if they siege or they separate the coast of Syria from the rest of Syria, and if they want to start another sectarian war in Syria by attacking the Alawites, for example, this will cause another civil war in Syria as well. So this is a really, really serious situation for everyone. How much of a support they will present up until this moment, this support is not enough. And if they think that hundreds of Iraqi fighters here and hundreds there could replace or reinforce the Syrian forces, not. Because behind these militants, you have a NATO country, the intelligence, the military, the training, the gears, the weapons, the drones used, the jamming technology, those are all sophisticated weaponry. And they are now waging targeted attacks by these drones against military personnel, against media personalities, and they're assassinating them. So they have the upper hand in terms of the technology. So if the other side doesn't supply Syria with the necessary equipment, technology, this is going to be a very difficult situation. And even if, let's say, Syria received like 40,000 now fighters from abroad to participate in these fights. Everybody should understand this is not a PlayStation that you can put the game and yalla, let's go and fight against each other. Mish heik yani, habibi. They have to create the fortifications first. They have to secure their positions before they go to the offensive. And to go to the offensive, they need a plan. They need to literally plan how every step should be implemented and what could happen if there is a setback and what could happen if there is a success and victory, the different scenarios. And this is going to be take weeks, probably months to plan in order to start a counteroffensive. So if anyone thinks that Syria probably will liberate the territories lost in the past weeks in a matter of few days or few weeks, that's not going to happen. It will take months, probably years. Maybe I'm being just pessimistic because I'm so tired of reading this news coming from my country. But realistically speaking, it is very difficult to recapture this. Or they have to go to a political process And the political process, in my opinion, is going to be have horrible consequences, because now, who are the main players in Syria? It's the government, it's Jolani, and the Kurds, right? So who's going to sit on the negotiation table? You can sit with the Kurds. Kurds are part of the Syrian society, and they have a respected civilization and culture and everything. You could negotiate with them. But how can you negotiate with Jolani? Like, what are the demands of Jolani? What can you give to Jolani, basically? I mean, there is no amount of makeup and rebranding and polishing the name of Jolani could change the fact that he doesn't believe in a civil society or civil state. He believes in a caliphate at the end. So trying to say that he cut his ties with Ayman al-Zawahiri and he is no longer part of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is an ideology. It doesn't necessarily have to Jolani to have now official formal ties with some headquarter of Qaeda in Tora Bora for him to be Al-Qaeda. He is implementing all the teachings and the ruling system on the people based on Al-Qaeda approach. Now in Aleppo, ask anyone in Aleppo now, anyone. I dare anyone to make private call when people feel secure, not in front of Al-Nusra TV, making interviews with people and asking them how they feel about our treatment. Oh, everything is fine, great, nothing is wrong with us. It's like everyone is terrified. They are destroying the Christmas markets, the decorations, and they destroying the alcohol shops, and they're asking women to cover their head. And this is something like is not. These people of Aleppo are not used. The people of Aleppo are used to have the choice. If you want to live your religious life, you can live your religious life as long as you're not imposing your approach on anyone. And the same thing goes to someone who wants to go at night to the bar and get drunk, right? Like people are free to do whatever they want. You can cover your head, you can wear a niqab, or you can go with a skirt, mini skirt. Nobody should impose his belief or way of life on others. So that is all what I'm asking for Aleppo, not Al-Qaeda rule. And these pundits sitting in Washington, D.C., in London, in Berlin, in Israel, those are not affected by what's happening in Aleppo. They're not going to go and live in Aleppo. That's why it's easy for them to call these militants rebels, that they are treating them nicely. And this is all propaganda. People are terrified. I talk to my beloved ones every day. The Nusra, they freed all the prisoners from the Aleppo prisons, and now there is a.
They're saying that they were political prisoners.
Oh my God, brother! The political prisoners are not even in Aleppo. Like they are a special prisoner. They are in Damascus. There is no political prisoner in Aleppo. Like this is if you kill someone, if you rob, if you cheat, I don't know, like all these violations that you do, crimes, you go to the Aleppo Central Prison. There is no political prisoner in Aleppo Central Prison.
So you're telling me they were freeing criminals, including people who were killers and to society.
Brother, today the people are yelling from the balconies, help, help, thieves, thieves. I have the video, just posted it on my X account. Ordinary civilians.
But Kevork, the armed groups, they also published phone numbers for people to contact in case of an emergency.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Actually, that's great. First, you free the criminals, and then you publish numbers. After shit hits the fan, that's great. Really. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Before I finish, we didn't have a lot of time to take a lot of questions. I'll just have one question for one of the viewers, and I'll wrap up with one more question potentially. But one of the viewers asked me, Johan George. So he said, why do you think Russia and the Syrian army didn't know about the HTS offensive beforehand? And why did Russia and Syria stop attacking Idlib earlier?
First of all, I know Johan. Hello, Johan. Thank you for watching this. He follows you and he follows me. He's a really good supporter of our work. Brother, if I answer you this question, I will end up as a political prisoner in Syria. How about that? Like, if I
Okay.
answer you this question, like,
No, we don't want you to
if I knew about the attack, and Johan, you know me, you follow my X account. If I knew about the attack on the September 30th, how did the Syrian intelligence, the Syrian army, the Russian intelligence didn't foresee this attack? If I knew it in my bathroom while I was watching the reels, how is it possible for them not to foresee this attack? It's just beyond me. And this is a major failure from the Syrian army, the allied forces, to detect the attack. And remember, in order to move a military unit, a brigade from Idlib to Aleppo, they had to drive 40 kilometers in the buffer zone. So they had a 40-kilometer a buffer zone, which they were able to hit them with artilleries, with drones, with air force, and this and that.
And they were declaring on social media.
Oh, like they were live broadcasting it on Facebook. So it's very crazy, and I don't want to go into conspiracies, but I have to put the blame where it deserves. And this was a major failure, security, military, from all sides, from Syria, from Russia, from Iran, from all the allies who were present in Aleppo, and now the trouble the problem we're already in a big trouble now. So we have to think about how to proceed from here and not to think in the past, because if we speak about it, as I mentioned more, I will end up as a political prisoner in Syria soon.
Final question. Is the solution Operation True Promise 3 to target the main...
Why do you want me to end up with making enemies after this show?
I'm just asking. People are asking me. They're saying, I think True Promise now is more than... No, do you think that move would actually support ending the conflict?
You're doing like this Al Jazeera program, Faisal Qasim. He's cursing your brother. Say something to him, let's fight. I think the mood in Damascus is negative. There is lots of reservations and about the Iranian policy now. And they were unhappy with Iran's behavior, let's say military attitude during the genocide in Gaza and also then the war on Lebanon. And they expected and asked increased participation of Iran in the conflict, because this is about the axis of resistance, and it's not about Gaza, not about Lebanon, not about Syria. And what basically happened, I'm not going to all put the blame on Iran, but basically what happened, now Israel started hitting every player in the axis of resistance separately, going to Gaza, destroying entire Gaza, and then going to Lebanon, killing entire leadership, and now in Syria. So if Israel is bold enough to take such actions and you don't take collective action against Israel, then you will be doomed. Now that they didn't take this True Promise 3 operation against Israel, Israel is more emboldened. And now if the price for it is going to be that Iran has to send lots of military to Syria and lots of military assistance, it will cost them a lot in lives, in hardware, and in money. So I think the price for not retaliating against Israel was way higher than not retaliating against Israel. And I say this with as a person who is grateful for Iran for coming to Syria and participating in the war against terrorism in the past and trying to save Syria from this foreign-backed insurgency. But as friends, as allies, as Syrians and Iranians can be, we can also be honest with this, that Iran's approach under the new leadership after Rouhani's killing, which I believe he was killed, I think this was it seems like there was a coup happened in Iran all of a sudden, and there was very hesitant.
But the current president was the one who carried out the Operation True Promise.
It was the IRGC, my friend, who carried out the attack.
But under his leadership.
Yeah, but it was because there has been lots of debate in Iran itself, and lots of contempt against the people of Zarif in Iran. And IRGC had to take it because the reputation of Iran is important in the region as a regional power. And they had to go into the second retaliation in a very strong way, in a show of force, not only for Israel, but also inside Iran itself. Like as if there was a political coup was ongoing in Iran before Operation Promise 2. And this attack has set the clock again correct. But then after the retaliation and all these developments in the region, I think Iran has to choose now. It either has to still sit and wait for this war to come to Iran, or it has to participate in it actively now, because now the war is happening. Now, as we speak, we have soldiers in Syria are getting killed every moment. So, and this is a fight for the axis of resistance, and not only fight for Syria.
I agree. I mean, to a large extent with that notion. I think Israel just expands more and becomes more arrogant. They breached the ceasefire with Lebanon 52 times. They're having the worst war crimes and genocide and infanticide in Gaza, and they only continue further. And the more this goes on, the more I see that there is no way out unless we have a massive all-out confrontation that would once and for all deal with the root cause of evil in the region. We'll wrap it up there. Kevork, thank you so much, my friend. Your fifth podcast today. I really do appreciate that. We, of course, pray for that the situation in Syria and Palestine, in the Levant and the West Asian region gets better. But unfortunately, as history has shown us, things sometimes do not get better before they get much worse before. But let's hope we're headed towards better days. And in the meantime, we will do our best to reveal the truth, or what is closest to the truth, really, based on our constant observation against the other war that is being waged, which is the war of propaganda that we constantly have to face. And I have to thank you a lot for your continued work in that respect. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in for another live stream. Thank you for all of your participation as well. And again, apologies for the limited questions, just for the time restrictions. And of course, we didn't want to stretch Kevork too much as well. In the meantime, everyone, stay blessed, take care, and we'll see you soon in the next video. And Kevork will hopefully see you soon with us as well. Peace, everyone.
Peace.